Hello and welcome to today's Facebook LinkedIn Live. I'm delighted because I'm going to be chatting with Sophie Brigden, who is a post-traumatic growth and leadership, get my words out, specialist. I'm going to be talking all about how you can unleash your potential after experiencing something that's quite traumatic in the workplace, and how it can often lend itself to growth, and you can obviously, in many situations achieve things you never thought possible, and it can actually, even though obviously the event can be hugely traumatic, it can lead to something positive afterwards. So thank you so much, Sophie, for joining me today. Thank you as well to everybody that's watching live and on the replay. Do let us know if you can hear us all okay. Give us a like or an emoji, and please pop it in the comments, your experiences, as we're talking as well, because we love to read them. Sophie, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure, as always, to chat with you. Before we dive in to today's session, someone might not have heard about post-traumatic growth. They may have heard of, post-traumatic growth disorders and things like that. But what is actually post-traumatic growth?
It's the positive psychological growth that comes after a experience, a situation or event that has rocked you to your foundations, and it makes you question how you see the world, the beliefs that you held to be true. So, for example, I'm safe, everything will always be stable, the person I'm married to will always be here, all these types of things. And that traumatic event is outside of our control. That's what makes it traumatic. It's not just a distressing event. It's something that we have no control over, as in we didn't see it coming. It could be sudden, it could be extreme, that you couldn't even fathom it. When you haven't had the training for it, your parents don't bring you up and go, right, we're going to sit you down.
Yeah. One day your husband might leave you.
Exactly. And it's because it sort of rocks your foundations and your core beliefs. It's kind of the danger is that the meaning that you take can really have an impact on your behavior. And the idea with post-traumatic growth, I guess, is there is profound positive change that can come from it. And that's what I really want to sort of elaborate on, because when we talk about trauma, it's that sense of fear. It's not a nice thing to talk about. And when I was going through it, it was absolutely horrendous. But I look on the other side of it now, and I know that I'm a better person in many ways. I wasn't horrific. I wasn't awful, but I definitely have changed. And that traumatic event will change you. It will shape you. Now, it could shape you in a negative way.
I was going to say, because there's no guarantee, something terrible happens to you, and you see people and they become quite bitter, and it's completely understandable depending upon what has happened.
Yeah.
And like, I know that you were in the army, and you see a lot of homeless people that were in the army, and there are things that, what is the difference? Is it something to do with someone's inner core and foundation as to how they're gonna deal with that trauma, or is it something to train and work on?
Nice question. So, there's lots of research starting to stem from it, but they say it is a mix of personality traits. So, like I was talking about, openness and curiosity, and that element of sort of growth mindset that is part of that resilience packages, that we are sort of teaching now. But then it will also depend on the type of traumatic event.
Yeah.
And it will also depend on a person's back history. So, you know, we might have experienced something earlier in our childhood that then has an impact later in our childhood. You know, we all have different environments that we're brought up with. We're all brought up in different environments where we have a set of beliefs that we're brought up with that could be challenged, right? We're all different. So yeah, personality, that kind of environment, the type of trauma. And then interestingly, they say about 1 in 10 Americans will suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder from a trauma, of which 30% of people within the armed forces will have something like PTSD. And that could be, you know, you could say that for people that are in the emergency services, depending on the job is, and all sorts of, you know, there are more at-risk groups. And then females as well. And females, there is I think it was, is it a 30% greater chance of them developing something like PTSD? And it is because of the type of trauma. So, for example, being in an abusive situation where they're stuck, you know, so it's happening
like
a longer period of time, or it's the type of trauma that happens to them, you know, where they're saying, you know, they compared, why is it that males and females are expressing it differently? And they said, well, it is the types of events. Men, it might be an explosion, but for a female it may be very different, and it might be multiples that stack up over time.
I'm just thinking about like miscarriage, and that is something that can happen repeatedly. You know, unfortunately to some women it's quite a private thing, and that's a trauma that builds up, and they often in many cases carry it quite privately. And you know, I mean, not to diminish, you mentioned an explosion, but you could only imagine that happening to somebody, you know, once, and then they'd be removed from that situation. But something like a miscarriage or whatever, it can be repeated.
And for myself, I think, you know, and I have, you know, the people that I've coached, yes, you can have this trauma, but then it's not in isolation. Exactly what you're saying, Liz. It stacks up. Life goes on, right? You know, when we can't, it's like we can wrap ourselves in cotton wool to protect ourselves, and we can, you know, go through life almost like a mummy trying to protect ourselves, but at the same time we haven't dealt with our trauma. So actually we've walled ourselves off to so much, from affection to love to letting people in, to all sorts of different things, because this is the way that we protect ourselves. And going back to that bitterness part, I did feel bitter. I can honestly say I felt bitter. It was unfair. It was unjust, you know, and I had no support. However, I had to choose for myself, which way are you going to go? Because nobody's going to drag you out of it. What's the life that you want to live? And it was a fight, but every day I told myself, I could feel it sitting there, and I was like, no, I am not going to let it take over my life. It is going to mean I'm going to do something positive with it. And that is part of the post-traumatic growth element. It's about, you know, part of my drive was to make something positive of it, to have purpose from it, and to help others. And I think that's the way that helped me take a step forward in the right direction.
It's difficult, isn't it? If you were in that situation at the moment, something, you know, terrible has happened to you, life seems bleak, you know, it's quite difficult then to like you say, get yourself out of that. And you know, it maybe needs a certain personality. But if you're watching this maybe and you've got a friend that has gone through something traumatic and you want to support your friend, how would you do that then, and to encourage them to get to the other side of that?
So I think that's a really lovely question. And when you're sort of spiraling down with trauma, I think one of the fears is that it's going, you know, people are frightened that they're going to pick it up as well. And there is sometimes people will step back, you know, and keep away. You know, I lost people along the way because, you know, and I'll be honest, they called me toxic. And Liz, do you know what? My behavior probably was toxic, but I was trying my best to, you know, to deal with it, but I didn't know what was wrong. And, you know, I didn't, and it was a slow process to come out of it. And that the people that have come to me for coaching have really valued having a safe space to be listened to, and somebody that's got their back, that just accepts them. And that's one of the most powerful things, I think, with anybody that has mental health, is just to accept them, not try to change them, not try to force them, listen to them, and try to be as supportive within boundaries as you can, because obviously you need to look after yourself too. But to be kind, I wasn't doing it on purpose. The people that go through this are not doing it on purpose. The stuff going on internally that they're really, really fighting. However, I do think it is important, because it comes to a point where it could be draining. If somebody is not trying to help yourself, that is very difficult. Yeah, because you can't make anybody. And it can take you down with them, because then you're sort of giving, and they're just, they're spiraling further down, and I guess it's the people I work with in coaching, it's one of the things that I make sure is, is that person ready? Are they ready to change? Are they in the right place? Do they want to? Are they motivated to make? Because otherwise they will keep coming to these sessions and bring the things that they want to work in, but we'll be going in circles the whole time, and it's just that they're not ready. But I think it has to come from the person that's suffering. They have to choose. They have to choose for themselves, because it has to be in a momentum, which is why I often worry about putting all our power in the hands of other people that are telling people, right, just do this, do that, do that. It might work for a short term, but in the long term, I'm not sure it works.
So actually, if you had a friend that's going through something, then how would you best support them then?
I would not force them to want to come and speak to me. I might raise my concerns and say, hey, I've noticed, that you're withdrawing, or that you're quieter, or, changes in just the relationship that we have. I'm here, and allow them to come sort of to me, because sometimes, people do, need to be on their own. And that is okay. But I guess it's the type of behavior that you're picking up. If you think that it's really concerning, then absolutely this needs to be sort of flagged up. But if you're just noticing these sort of symptoms, then just reach out, show that you care, be heartfelt.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's not crossing the road when you see that person. It's
and just being, I think it's having, it's having that consistent person that is a bit of a rock, and they could be a silent rock, but they know that you're there, and that you don't judge them, and that they can reach out to you and they can talk, and that you will listen to them without telling them what to do. Because I think sometimes just people want to be heard, but it is important that they're taking steps forward. And I think that's an important thing you need to be watching out for, because if they're not, the spiral continues to sort of go down.
Jane says she carries so much bitterness about so much. Moving forward is super hard, but on we go, because otherwise we leave our beautiful selves behind. We all have mental health. It's part of being a human. Boundaries are a blessing. And she actually thinks circles are part of healing.
Circles, as in, I wonder if she'd add like her explanation as to what she means by circles, please. Lovely.
So if you are watching this and you've had a tough time and you want to experience, we're going to be talking about post-traumatic growth, what are the steps you can take, I guess, to start healing yourself from potentially might have been in a tragedy? How can you heal from that?
I think the first thing is if I really think about the first step, it is that acceptance. And that doesn't mean come to peace with what's happened. It doesn't mean forgive. It doesn't mean anything like that. But it just means, okay, this has happened and this is where I'm at. And what am I going to do about it? Because the initial part when we're sort of in that free fall is we're fighting, or we've got our head in the sand. You know, there's lots of denial, or there's all that rumination. But the point of that acceptance is the first step to going, okay, so I'm here now. What am I going to do to move forward? And I can't say what's right for everyone, Liz, because everybody is different in
And
what works for
would
them.
be different, yeah.
Yeah, but also what works for them. But in terms of trauma, the first thing I would say in that long journey is you're hugely dysregulated, emotionally dysregulated. And while you're emotionally dysregulated, it's very, very hard to then make sense, make peace, to come to terms, to switch on that more logical side of the brain, because your emotional brain is on overdrive. So we want to calm down the central nervous system.
How long would that period, or does it depend upon what happened in your personality? Is it?
Sorry, what was the
question? I
question?
was going to say, how long does that time period last when you are, you're emotional?
Well, I was 4 years, wasn't I? And it just got worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And for others, if they catch it early, I don't know how long's a sort of piece of string, but the earlier you pick up that actually it's all part of your fighting and spiral down. So, your amygdala and your stress response is secreting all those hormones. Your prefrontal cortex is offline. You're on hyper alert. You're ruminating. And you're emotionally dysregulated with all that anxiety. Your central nervous system is whacked out as part of the stress response, and it hasn't shut off. So in order to calm that down, you've got to calm your central nervous system down. And there are things that we've talked about before. So one of the things that really, well, there were two things that really helped me. So it was the eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So that really helped me, at least with the flashbacks, which is where you're waking up and you're reliving past events, but they're almost like vivid photographs at the front of your mind. And it's all too much and your brain can't compartmentalize it and to put it to bed. So that was one part of it.
So what was that? So
eye movement desensitization.
And what's that involved?
So this doctor called Shapiro basically found it when she it's been around for a good decade, I would say now. She had cancer, and she was waking up with these sort of she suffered trauma from it, and she found that basically this simple movement of going from left to right across the eyes with a finger started to help her reprocess all this burden of thoughts and rumination that she couldn't sort of compartmentalize in it. I don't know the ins and outs in it because I haven't trained in it. You can find specialists, but basically, it's something to do with the link between the different hemispheres of the brain.
Okay.
And that connection, bridging that connection.
What, basically trying to connect them back, disconnecting is trying to connect them back again.
Trying to sort of to allow the brain to process, because it's very sort of emotional. So allowing it to process what's there at the forefront of the brain, and it can't go away and it keeps coming back, and allowing it to get sort of stored in the longer term memory. And this process of fingers that she started on then started this kind of revolution. And now, people use lights. People pat people's sort of knees, you know, in a kind of sort of with their hands, and it's just this left and right motion that is connecting to those different sides of the brain and helps things slowly, you know, reside within the brain and get stored in a more healthy way.
Okay.
But I think, you know, I'm not a technical expert, and you can probably hear that, but those are the basics of it. And then you've got something called neurofeedback, and neurofeedback we've talked about before, and those are the electrodes on the head at different parts of the brain, and they measure your brain waves that you produce. And we all produce brain waves: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, theta brain waves, and they're all responsible for different things. And neurofeedback was initially developed by NASA scientists, and then it was used for children. It's now used for children with ADHD. They're using it with people who have addictions, and have got really positive results. And my practitioner was working with a kid who was 14 years old. She'd been in a road traffic accident. She had brain damage. She couldn't eat apart from tubes. She couldn't stand up. She couldn't focus on anything. So she couldn't study, and she nearly missed a whole year of school. And by the power of neurofeedback and retraining the brain, which meant that it rescaffolded it, we produced these new neurons every day. So it rebuilt and rewired the brain to a more healthy function. She went back to school. She finished, you know, her GCSEs. She could eat, she could stand, you know. And if I think about my development from where I came from with neurofeedback, and we were talking about me getting to the top of that blimmin' mountain, you know, it just would not have happened without these sort of things. So it really calmed my central nervous system and helped with my emotional regulation. And neurofeedback also helps with peak performance. Like, there's all sorts of famous people who want to go the extra mile, and so they train their brain to work in a more fast, you know, or more sort of I'm not getting the words out today, a more responsive and efficient way. But there's also things that you can
I was going to say, because Jane said, how accessible is this? And this is true, because we all, you know, we're not going to lie, we all know what the NHS is like, particularly at the moment. It's hard to get referrals to specialists. So what else can we do ourselves?
Yeah,
absolutely. Or something a lot lower level that's something more accessible as well?
So I did yoga, and yoga was brilliant because it's somatic. So for me, it was so frightening to feel these feelings. I'd never experienced such extreme feelings. For a lot of people that go through trauma, they're fighting those feelings, they're trying to hold them down, right? We often do it, don't we? We sort of, you know, close down on them. And it was a very gentle way of getting into my body, but also using movement and also breathing. So really somatic. So there was healthy sort of exercise, but there was also all that breathing that was happening, that gradually over time also helped me calm what was happening up here and restore what was going on in there. So, you know, the central nervous system obviously is flowing through your body as well. So it was that body-mind connection. So that was one thing. I meditated, so I put myself on some meditation courses. So there was mindfulness-based stress reduction course, which was a 12-week course that I put myself on, so that I got into a real habit of it, and I continued that. I listened to affirmations when I was at my most desperate. I didn't care what I was listening to. And I found some things around religion. There was this woman called Joyce Meyer, and I'm not particularly religious, but she had this amazing story of what she'd gone through, absolutely horrific. And she'd used the Bible to get through. And really, it's like I think the Bible's like a modern day belief book, really, you know. And she used this to take steps every day and just believe that with one step at a time she would get better. So it was listening to people like that, listening to people that are inspiring, you know, that you can listen to. And there's just natural breath, just deep breathing. You know, there's lots of exercises out there, and walking in nature. That was another one, because that kind of really gentle rhythmic stepping is again that kind of left right brain movement that we've just been talking about, you know, and just being around green and peace is settling, obviously, for the senses. And I also started writing, and they've done lots of research around it, that actually getting thoughts down on paper, whatever it is, you know, it switches on the more logical part of your brain. So you're going from something that's just emotional, you're thinking about that feeling, and then you're expressing that emotion, you know. So it's the balance of the different parts of the brain. They all help.
Brilliant. Someone else has said, she sounds like a cliche, but time is a great healer, and being kind to oneself along the way is important, which is true. So we've talked now about, you know, trauma, and then some of the things you can help to heal, or, you know, after that trauma. What then, can you give us some examples then of some of the growth you know you've experienced, and also some of the people that you work with have experienced after acknowledging that trauma and working through it?
Yeah, I explain it like a bit of you know, you have it's a new blueprint. So something's come along, say it's like a tsunami, and it's just wiped everything out, and you're still standing, you know, and you're standing without anything in front of you on a bare ground, and you're like, right, who am I? Who do I want to be? What do I want to do with this experience and knowledge? You know, and what is my new path based on it? And I think growth for me, before what had happened, my focus was very much on building myself financially, my status, my career. You know, that's where a lot of my energy went. And I'm not saying that that's not important, right? But other things became more valuable.
Yeah.
So first of all, my relationship with myself, you know, knowing myself so much more, listening to my emotions in a more emotionally intelligent way, and feeding those emotions with what they need. And if that means a no, or if that means taking a step back, or not doing something that somebody wants you to do, you know, or putting my mental health first, I absolutely will do that. That is a priority. So my priorities have changed. What I want out of life has changed. So I think, you know, people that I've worked with, you know, and they don't have to be extreme traumas like me. They could have been just a sudden redundancy, really unfair, just chop, you know, you're kind of discarded like this kind of object. We've all come across people who've gone through something horrific like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I'm going to take this time out to really think about, what do I want next? What kind of culture do I want to be in? What kind of work do I want to be doing? Those sorts of sides of things. And I think from growth, you know, if you can get away from that bitterness, there is so much value in your experience. I'm not just talking about mine. Many people, many of you that may listen to this, have gone through something that can really add value to somebody else's life or lives, you know, whether that's the change of a system, whether it's supporting somebody else that's going through something difficult, whether it's about taking a stand for something to change something, you know. And I think that's one of the keys of growth. It's finding meaning and purpose from it, you know, and for myself to make lives better for others, I think. And I think one of the other things that I've really noticed is, look, I'm not perfect by a long stretch of imagination, but the pain that I went through and the struggle led me to realise how blimmin' difficult it is. And it increased my empathy
Yeah, absolutely.
Go through stuff, and I notice this in our Western world, and I'm not necessarily telling it, you know, saying this is anyone that's listening to it, but in our Western world, we have it so easy, really, you know, and we're carried along. And, you know, in the Southeast, you know, if you're in the Southeast, really nice, rich area, generally, you know, very affluent. And you know, that empathy, there is a lack of empathy for sure that I've come across, and I've seen other people experience, you know, in the way that they've been treated. And I think that's one of the great things that comes, and that is a great connector with people, you know. So relationally, I would say a lot of my shallow relationships fell by the wayside. I've noticed other people's shallow relationships have fallen by the wayside.
Yeah.
But different people come into your world, you know, that you have a closer affiliation with, that you're more willing to be vulnerable with, more real with, and honest with. And that's one of the other things. I'm not frightened to be vulnerable anymore, because I really held that vulnerability back, and it was one of the biggest mistakes as to why I spiraled down. And I think it's so important to be vulnerable, because it connects us. And the other side of it is it shuts us away from people.
Oh, I love it. You know what? I'm just listening to this and I'm like, I feel, you know, there was things like you talked about the redundant. I was made redundant, and you know, if I hadn't been made redundant, I wouldn't have founded Investing in Women. And it's shit being made redundant, but actually, you know, once you've sort of got over that initial shock, and you can turn that into something hugely positive. And you talked about the empathy, and that's something, you know, I've experienced. You know, I've had infertility, and then I had to have IVF treatment to have my eldest daughter. And before that, I feel like, God, you know, I had it so easy, and I didn't have a lot of empathy for others, and didn't really understand other people's trauma. And now I feel like I'm a lot more sensitive when it comes to other people, regardless of what their experiences are. It doesn't have to be infertility. I think you're just aware actually more that life can be unkind.
Yeah. I am definitely a more compassionate person. I like myself more for it.
Yes,
for sure.
absolutely.
For sure.
And the vulnerability thing is, I'm nodding. Jane has said, Tai Chi yoga, mindfulness is great, but it doesn't address systematic issues. So these, coupled with activism, which we sort of touched upon, has helped her. She absolutely agrees with you about journaling. And then I'm probably going to pronounce this person's name wrong. Ghislaine Kinuane.
Oh God.
Kinunai, sorry, I can't this lady's name, has a very useful model which she's found helpful. Her book Living While Black is excellent for dealing with trauma, and she says harnessing the rage is great too. Sorry, I butchered that person's name.
That was
Living While Black is excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I've written
Thank you. We will check that book out.
No, absolutely. It absolutely is systemic too, and that's part of my passion and the consultancy and speaking out as well. Yeah, absolutely. So for all those people doing good work out there, you know, I'm with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us today. How do you help people, before we wrap up, that, you know, are dealing with trauma? How can they access your services as well, and what do your services?
www.beyourbest.org.uk, and on the website there are a range of blogs about sort of my experience and about some of the systemic issues that I experienced. And there's also stuff around, I do sort of talks, consultancy and coaching. So there's sort of different offers there. In terms of the coaching sort of aspect, really, I am working with people in the point where they've gone through the shock, and they're now at the point where they're standing still. That tsunami's come past, and they're like, right, okay, how do I go forward? And I sort of help them create that new blueprint, you know, moving forward. And you absolutely can do it on your own, and I think people do it on your own. do it on their own. But for me, I wish I'd had somebody that I could have talked to, you know, that I could just turn and say, you know, I have no idea what's going on or what's happening, and they could recognize potential trauma in me, and say, actually, you need to go and get greater help, or actually, yeah, okay, I think I can
helpful,
support.
isn't it? Whatever you're going through, just to be able to talk to somebody that gets
Yeah.
it, not judgmental. So
Yeah.
what you do is brilliant. So thank you so much, Sophie. You're also obviously on LinkedIn.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Connect with Sophie on LinkedIn.
On to anyone, yeah, please reach out.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to everybody that has watched.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye.
Bye-bye.